Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today as always. We're going to talk about how to ask for a raise today. Many of us are working at a W-2 position. You get a paycheck, you go to work, maybe you work at home, and maybe you've been there for a while, maybe you're just starting out. At some point, it's going to be important to kind of learn how to ask for an increase in compensation. We don't want compensation to be stagnant, I should say. We want to make sure that you are continually seeing progress in your compensation. And this is very difficult for a lot of people. Asking for a raise is uncomfortable for many. It's something that's not maybe natural to us. It's something that is difficult to kind of navigate for many of us. And I find that a lot of people, they end up really not getting paid what they're worth, or they don't see constant progress or evolution in their compensation simply because they don't speak up or they don't know how to navigate the conversations around asking for a raise. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Should be fairly straightforward and simple, but I want to talk through my preferred method of asking for a raise. And this comes from a lot of experience over 2 decades in owning businesses. So I have employed people in the past. I do employ people currently. I have had businesses with anywhere from 10 people, give or take, up to 80 people, give or take. So and a lot in between. So I have been on the employer side for a very long time, and so this is coming from the perspective of working with team members who I have paid, who have worked for me and worked with me. And some of the things I think are very effective in asking for a raise if you're a team member, talking to a manager, or even perhaps the business owner if you're working for a smaller company. So what I see often is there's kind of a couple ends of the spectrum here. I see that often when people are thinking about their compensation, on one end of the spectrum, they never speak up, or they rarely speak up, or they sell themselves short. They simply never bring up the conversation about compensation because they're uncomfortable. Maybe when they have their annual reviews, they just kind of say, oh, great, I'm going to kind of accept the feedback and accept whatever I'm given. I'm not really going to open the conversation for negotiation, and they just sort of accept whatever is offered. And sometimes this can be productive if you have, if you're fortunate enough to be in a great organization or have a great manager or a boss that really looks out for you and really continually has that compensation upgrade path laid out for you. Or maybe you're in an organization where it's very rigid, maybe a government or a very rigid organization where it's sort of a formulaic approach. That can be practical. But in general, a lot of people, they just don't ask. They just don't bring it up because it's uncomfortable. And they go throughout their career being fairly underpaid. The other end of the spectrum is that often there are people that maybe less common, but they will bring up the conversation in a very adversarial or aggressive kind of stance. They will say things like, "Hey, I feel like I deserve this. I want to get paid this. I'm going to leave if I don't get X, Y, Z," and that can sometimes work, but it can sometimes backfire. It can sometimes create conflict in the organization and create defensiveness and a posture of conflict between you and your manager. So that is not always productive either, to be extremely aggressive about it and kind of ultimatum driven in your approach of asking for a raise. So how do you ask for a raise? What do you do if you want to increase your compensation, if you feel like you deserve more, if you feel like you're able to command a higher salary, maybe your skills, your experience, the value you bring to your organization is really points to you getting paid more would be appropriate. So what do you do? So here's what I like to do. When asking for a raise, here's my recommendation for opening this conversation in a way that is productive and assertive and fair to you, but also friendly and productive to your manager or boss as well. So first, what I want to do is I'd recommend first documenting your value to the organization. So before you go into any conversation about this, you want to make sure you're armed with clear documented examples of the value you're bringing. So things like projects you've been involved in that have been successful, ways you've saved the company money, ways you have increased, market share, ways you've increased growth in the company, just all of the value you've brought to the company. Document that literally in a document. Write it down, put it in a document, put it somewhere you can reference it. It may take a while because often we just don't think of all the wins we've had. We just kind of gloss over them sometimes mentally because we're distracted and busy. But it's important to kind of think through the last few years and really document the things you have done in your organization to really move things forward, to really provide value. It's also a good exercise just for you mentally because you'll start to really see how valuable you are to the organization. And that's a really good emotional boost, I think. It's really productive, I think, for your well-being in general. So I think it's good to do that. Next, you want to do some research on appropriate salary ranges for what you do. You want to look at sites like Glassdoor or salary.com. Look at a wide variety because some of the sites are very skewed. Sometimes they'll give you very unrealistic salary ranges. So make sure you look at as many sites as possible. Even talk to peers and other companies doing what you do and just really get a good handle on what an appropriate salary range is for someone in your position with your experience and your skills, and then tailor to the size of the company you work for, as well as geography and industry. So look at all these factors and make sure you're being very fair about the compensation range that is appropriate for you. You want to make sure that you're working with fair, realistic numbers. And then come up with what you think is a reasonable next level for you. So maybe today you're making X, and based on the salary research you've done and the value you're bringing to the organization, maybe you feel like Y is a salary that is more appropriate for you to get to in the next 1 to 2 years. And that's where you want to be. So once you have this information, you have documented examples of the value you bring. You have salary research that is thorough and realistic and fair. And you have a number in mind of where you want to be from a salary standpoint. So then the next step is when you have your annual review. If you want to wait till the review time, you can certainly do that. If you want to prompt an off-schedule meeting with your manager, that can be appropriate as well. Kind of feel this out based on your situation. But the next time you're able to have a conversation about compensation, bring this information, maybe literally in documents so you can reference it, and just kind of talk through first, mention, hey, I feel like I'm valuable to this organization. I've done these things. I just really kind of want to, I've been documenting these things for my own information and just to kind of track the successes and the contributions I've had here because I love being here and I love the success I've been able to contribute to. So I kind of frame it that way. Then next, bring up the compensation topic. Say, hey, just so you know, I've been doing some research and I've been noticing that the salary range for someone in my position with my experience and all the other factors I've kind of put into play is this range here. Currently, I'm here. So I would like to be at this salary within the next, let's say, 1 to 2 years. This is kind of important to me. So how do we work together to get there? That is a very different way of framing the conversation. So instead of saying, hey, I deserve this, I want this, I want to be paid this, or I'm leaving, or very ultimatum driven, you're saying, hey, I am interested in getting to this point in my compensation. Let's work together to see how we can get there. How do we get there? And just kind of leave the question open at that. Stop talking after that. Say literally that. How do we work together to get there? And that basically puts the ball into your manager's court to respond, to think about. And it's very non-confrontational. It's a collaborative question. It's a way of saying, hey, I'm paying attention. I know what I'm worth. I know I bring value. And here's my goal. And I would like your help in getting there. So as a manager, if I'm on the other side, if my team member is coming to me as a manager or a boss or a business owner, and they frame it that way, I feel, instead of feeling intimidated or defensive or attacked or whatever, I'm feeling very appreciative. I'm feeling very open to a conversation because it is such a collaborative tone that you are speaking around. So that's a great way of opening it up and turning it into a negotiation and a collaboration. So a great manager is going to take that very well and say, okay, great. Let's, thanks for bringing this up. Let me figure out what we can do to get there. Now, depending on your organization, it's going to be different. So let's say you're in a large company and your manager has a boss and a boss above that and many layers of bosses. It's kind of a more of a bureaucratic corporate environment. Your manager's probably going to have to say, you know what, I'm not sure, but let me see what we can do. And they're going to have to talk to their supervisors and their leadership teams and kind of look at budgets and figure out what's possible. They're likely going to go to their immediate managers and say, hey, so-and-so brings a lot of value. They've brought up that they'd like to get here. I'd like to keep them. I want to make sure they're happy. What can be done? And they may advocate for you. They may advocate for this raise, this salary increase for you. So again, if you're in a kind of a corporate environment, it's going to be a little slower. It's going to have lots of red tape involved, but it's still very realistic to get an increase. Let's say you're in a very small company where maybe your manager is the business owner. Maybe you're in a company of a handful of people and your direct boss is the owner. So quite honestly, it's going to be different because often business owners, transparently, often business owners fly by the seat of their pants. They don't have a lot of structure in place. They don't have a lot of formulas or plans in place for salary progression. They just sort of are putting out fires every day. They're working with all these different inputs and things they have to worry about. They're not trying to ignore you, but their priority is on things like lowering expenses, increasing profitability, increasing market share, getting new customers, doing sales. All this stuff is at the forefront. So you have to really make a little bit of noise and remind them of what's important to you as well. And so when you're working with a business owner, there's some pros and cons there as well. So a pro is they can make decisions much more quickly. They can just say, well, yeah, I can pay you more. Let's do it. And they can make that decision often on the spot. The con is they may be less organized and have less of a process than a large corporate entity, which means that they may not have or feel like they have the budget to increase compensation. They may have to figure out how they're going to make it happen and shuffle other things around or do some planning. So, there's some pros and cons there. Either way, it's important to speak up because business owners, managers, bosses, again, they have a lot on their plate, and your compensation evolution is not necessarily at the top of the list. Not because they don't care, but because there are so many competing priorities. Again, things like budgets, expenses, sales, increasing revenue and profits, market share, lots of projects. There are lots of things at the top of the list. And you need to make sure that you get your place in that list. And again, so going back to the conversation, I love keeping it very collaborative. So again, the framing it as, here's where I'd like to get to. How do we make that happen? And then for the most part, if you have a good manager or a good boss or a good business owner, they're going to appreciate the tone with which you ask. They're going to appreciate the conversation framed that way, and they're going to work with you to make it happen. If they don't, that's a pretty good signal that maybe you want to look elsewhere. Maybe this is not the place for you. If someone takes that badly, or they never follow up, or they never even give you a reason why it can't happen right now, all those are valid responses. But if none of that happens, if they just don't really participate in the conversation with you, then maybe you don't belong there. Maybe there's a place where there's a better fit for you with an organization that appreciates you. So that is how I would approach asking for a raise. Again, avoid the spectrums of never speak up, the other spectrum of too aggressive and make it confrontational. I really like the collaborative approach of how do we work together to get to the compensation where I want to get to. That to me is the best way to ask for a raise, and I think it's a much more comfortable way. You're going to enjoy asking for these conversations much more if you approach it this way. It's like I said, it's less pressure, less confrontation, just a real nice collaborative discussion. So that is how I would ask for a raise. To recap, document your worth, document all the wins and successes you've had and the value you bring. Step 2, do lots of research on appropriate salary ranges and come armed with a specific number in mind. And step 3, approach it as the conversation of here's where I'd like to be. How do we get there together? So that is how I would ask for a raise. So again, important to speak up for yourself. It's important to get paid what you're worth. So give this a try. And if you'd like to talk through it any further, maybe you're kind of struggling with asking for compensation increases or you still feel uncomfortable, feel free to book a conversation with me via my website. I'm happy to talk through it with you. As someone who's employed people for 2 decades, I would be happy to give you insight on how you might approach this conversation in your particular situation as well. So with that, as always, to book that meeting, you can find me on my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. There's a button right there that you can book a complimentary money session with, and we can chat about this or anything else you have questions about. So with that, thanks for joining me today. As always, have a great day. We'll see you next time.